coffee. Okay, I'm back.
I am Terry Gordon, the senior editor at the New English Review, and this is day 391 of the October 7th War, which has different names: Iron Swords, Redemption Day, you name it. Unfortunately, this war has taken its tolls, particularly in Israel, of its most courageous, its military. The IDF has sustained, current account, about 778 killed, over 12,000 injured, a number of those evacuated successfully, but still injured. And then again, as my colleague, former Brigadier General, U.S. Army, retired, John Adams, knows, there is essentially significant growing civilian casualties across central Israel and the northern frontier, given the sustaining Hezbollah rocket, drone, and missile attacks. So let's begin, as we normally do, General, with essentially your prayers on behalf of the IDF and State of Israel.
Let us ask Hashem for his blessing on all the Israeli people and the Jewish community worldwide. But let's particularly ask Hashem for his blessing and for the blessed memory of those who have died, both military and civilian, in this civilizational war against terrorism, starting on September, correction, that began on October the 7th last year.
Let's start with the obvious recent occurrence. How significant was the impact of the IAF strike on Iranian military targets in Operation Days of Redemption? And how credible are the threats at retaliation by Iran and its proxies?
Well, I think it was hugely significant tactically. I mean, perhaps the most important outcome from the tactical standpoint is that Israel successfully attacked targets in Iran, specifically military targets and military industrial targets, without any casualties. All of its aircraft, more than 100 aircraft, participated in the attack. Fighters, bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, all participated and all came back safely. What that demonstrates is that Israel can attack. It did attack with impunity, and it also demonstrates it can re-execute the attack as it needs to. The Iranian air defense systems that were eliminated were crucial to any defense of the Iranian airspace. And they're mostly gone now, including the S-300, which was one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. Iran has it. China has it. It's a very good weapon system for air defense, and Israel just took it out. The other, I think, important aspect of this is that it satisfied, at least temporarily, the need to demonstrate that Israel can respond to Iranian attacks. It can retaliate successfully. I think another outcome was that some of the bombing destroyed the capacity and the stockpile of the solid fuel rocket engines, which are used for which were needed. The fuel is needed to send to Russia for its war. They can't replace that easily. It takes a while to not only to develop the solid fuel itself, but also the capacity to make the solid fuel. And bomb damage assessment indicates that that capacity was severely damaged during the attack. So I think that's another significant effect of this particular attack. I think one effect that didn't happen, and I think is kind of on the shelf for now, is destruction of nuclear capabilities. Um, and there are a lot of reasons why Israel didn't attack that. I think the primary reason, honestly, was pressure from the United States. Nor did they attack refinery assets in Iran. Again, the primary reason, the overt pressure from the United States to not do that limited that attack. Can it be done in the future? Yes, they could. They could re-execute, and they may in the short term. But they decided not to do it now because of, again, primarily because of pressure from the United States. And I think they are wise. They were wise to do that given the situation, the domestic situation in the United States.
The other target they did hit was the Parchin facility, which tests the nuclear triggers, explosive triggers, depending upon what configuration for a nuclear weapon that Iran chooses to go with. But what do you think about the recent credible threats allegedly raised by the Ayatollah and the IRGC commander?
I
Is
don't
Iran
think
really that resilient?
I don't think so. I think they've got two problems. One, the tactical problem of retaliating, which has been done now twice. They've attacked with massive force of ballistic missiles, and not just from Iran, but from their allies throughout the region. They've done this twice. They did it in April. They did it in October. Both were massively unsuccessful. So I think it's a lot of bluster. But I also think that when they have to do something, they have to have the bluster. They can't just say, "Yeah, we're done." So the bluster is important for two reasons. One, because they want to fire up their own supporters, and two, they're afraid, very much afraid of a regime change. There's a lot of opposition within Iran right now to the government, and it's been building for years. But an event like this gives fuel to the opposition. It gives fuel to the Balukis in southeast Iran. It gives fuel to the Arab Khuzestan, the Arabs that are also restive in southwest Iran, and to other regime groups, opposition groups who will look for an opportunity to rise up against the regime. And so saying that, yes, they're going to respond and to try to stoke opposition against against Israel as a way to keep their own supporters in their camp.
So, what impact did this strike have on normalization with Sunni Arab countries, notably in the Gulf region, including most significantly Saudi Arabia?
My thought on that is that Saudi Arabia understands history. They're they're realistic. They're not going to do anything that's against their own interests long term. And I think they know it's in their long interest to make some sort of arrangement with Israel, preferably mutual recognition. And they've also indicated in the past they don't really care that much about the so-called Palestinian problem. That's thrust at them every time there's a question of recognition of Israel, including by the United States, by our current administration. They don't want a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia that doesn't include a two-state solution for the so-called Palestinians. But the Saudis are smart. They know, they're also, they don't know which way our own domestic politics are going to go. If the current administration stays in power, then they have to continue to play the same game, pay obeisance to the two-state solution, and we're not going to reconcile with Israel until that's on the table too. If this current administration is overtaken, then that opens up the possibility once again, as it was a year and a half ago, of making a peace and a recognition with Israel without over the top of the Palestinian issue. And I think they're just like Israel. They're looking at our elections next week, and I think they'll make some decisions based on the outcome. We don't, you and I don't know what's going to happen, but they really don't know. They just don't know where to put their bets right now.
Did the Israeli strike impact Iran's transfer of missiles and drones to Russia? And
Yes, it did. It appears to have severely affected it. Not, we talked about the production of solid rocket fuel, which is going to have a major impact on that particular weapon system for ballistic missiles that they cannot provide anymore, or they won't be able to without addressing their own problems. So just like we, the United States, are running out of ammunition to send to Ukraine, now Iran is running out of the kinds of weapons and equipment and fuel, particularly, that they can send to Russia. So it will have a perhaps unintended, although I suspect the Israelis knew what they were doing. They don't bomb things and target things randomly. They're precise. They know exactly where to hit and what they're doing. And I think they really wanted to hurt the supply chain for weapons and equipment going to Russia. They succeeded.
It's not lost on a lot of us that something like 60% of the air crews that were used for the assault on Iran, the F-35s, the 15s, and 16s, were piloted by reservist members of assigned squadrons, including 4 women navigators. What message did that convey regarding mandatory training and practice runs to achieve this stunning result?
How important the reserve system is for all parts of the Israeli military, but particularly for the Air Force. The Israeli Air Force is very dependent on reserve pilots, reserve crew members, reserve personnel. This was highlighted in a perhaps unexpected way during last year's protests in the streets against the Israeli government over the judicial reforms. And one of the most often heard comments from protesters was, well, the reserve Air Force pilots are with us. Well, I don't know if that's completely true. I know some of the dynamics behind that, and it was designed to put pressure on Netanyahu at the time, and it seems to have, under the pressure of war, the reserve pilots seem to have said, yeah, I think we're going to stick with the IAF, the Israeli Air Force. But what it says is that when you see a statistic like more than 60% of the pilots and crew members who are participating in the attack were actually reserve members of the Israeli Air Force, how important that particular demographic is for the Air Force, and why they need to really be careful with the way they handle their reserve aviators. And they are.
Turning to the IDF so-called limited incursion in Lebanon, how effective has been the operation been to date in destroying Hezbollah infrastructure, the Redwan command and control systems, and the resilience in the wake of assassination of Nasrallah and succeeding cadres? And by the way, it's not lost on a lot of us that his successor is now safely in Tehran.
Yeah. If you are a leader in Hezbollah, you don't want to be above ground in the daytime. You want to be somewhere where they can't find you, and they have eyes all over Lebanon. They can go anywhere they want. The Israelis, it's a 30-minute at the most flight from Ramat David Air Base in northern Israel to Beirut. And anywhere in southern Lebanon. You can go to northern Lebanon, but there aren't many Hezbollah up there. But they have complete coverage of Lebanon, and that's shown by the results. They've taken out the leadership of Hezbollah. If you look at a picture of the Hezbollah chain of command, There's like nine major leaders, seven of whom now are in the next world because they've been taken out. Uh, Reasonable estimates that 70% of Hezbollah soldiers, commandos, are dead. They've been killed, and counting more and more, passing away of unnatural causes every day. There are other reasonable assumptions about their drones that they have. Up to 80% have either been fired, which means they don't work anymore, or they've been destroyed on the ground, which means they don't work anymore. And they had a tremendous, some estimates were as much as 150,000 total rockets, missiles, and drones. And up to 80% of that's now gone, both because they've been shot already or because they've been hit by either Israeli Air Force targeting or by IDF attack on the launch sites. I think one of the most significant results is the loss of popular support for Hezbollah, which is commonly found if you look at the press reports. The Lebanese press reports are all about how Hezbollah is less popular than it was before. And understandably, one, they have done nothing but make the rest of Lebanon a wasteland by integrating into their infrastructure and their cities, and making civilians targets, or kind of like they did in Gaza. The way that Hezbollah, as did Hamas in Gaza, the way Hezbollah protects itself is put itself inside the cities. Make the civilians the shields for the military assets. And it's not lost on the Lebanese population that that's their tactic, and they're less popular now. And then the last thing I'll say is that estimates as much as $3.3 billion of Hezbollah assets have been destroyed, either by weapons, bombing of the banks and the assets, and destruction of the assets, or just destroying the ability to access it. I mean, this is a full court press on part of Israel, both military and civilian, to eliminate the ability of Hezbollah to finance its operations. They've been successful.
IDF units have uncovered vast tunnels equipped with weapons and armament penetrating the border frontier with Israel, virtually underneath the UNIFIL observation posts, in preparation for an invasion of vulnerable northern Israeli and Golan communities. What does that say about Hezbollah's undermining of UN multinational peacekeeping and penetration of Lebanon forces? And before you fly, I'd like to comment that everywhere where the UN has peacekeeping forces globally, they have failed to protect native populations. The best example is in Sudan, which is currently the subject of a jihadist war. But go ahead.
Oh, thank you. But you're absolutely right. That's not their mission to protect civilian populations. Would that be the case? But it's not. Their mission is to support the UN by providing troops to go to conflict areas and pretend, because that's what it is, pretend to be neutral. And so in terms of that mission, sending troops to conflict areas and pretending to be neutral, they're a great success. But in terms of protecting civilian populations, you look at Africa, you just mentioned Sudan, but look at other places in Africa. Look what they did in other parts of, like, the Congo. They weren't very effective because that wasn't why they were there. When I was stationed in Croatia 20 years ago, they had troops in a part of Croatia purportedly to separate the Serbs and the Croats, and they did a very poor job of that because of the troops they send. So this is the dirty little secret of UNIFIL and other UN operations, is that they don't send the best troops. They send the troops that they can get. Sometimes the troops they send aren't equipped. They don't have boots. There were Bangladeshi troops sent to Croatia 20 years ago, and they'd show up without boots. So how do they get boots? Well, they kind of beg them from other people, but they were unable to operate. Specifically in Lebanon, there's a long history of UNIFIL collaborating with whoever's in charge, and giving them whatever they want in terms of both smuggling, both personnel and equipment, and being completely under the control of, in this case, Hezbollah. So why and there's a tremendous disincentive for them to do anything else because their lives are at stake. Hezbollah would just as soon kill them. So if they don't play well with Hezbollah, they could get shot. Could be accidental, could be on purpose, but bottom line is their lives are at risk. So you know that the people that are there they have no the countries that send troops for the most part. I mean, we'll accept the Finns and the Croatians and some other militaries that have a duty concept of some sort. But there's a lot of countries that provide troops to the United Nations that have no duty concept. They just send troops and they get they get paid by the UN, by us, by the United States, which is the
Correct.
major contributor for UN funds. It's a game. It's a sick game. But from the standpoint of the soldiers, can understand why a very low-ranking soldier in the UN force would not want to risk his life by making the Hezbollah angry. So better to just get along and go along, try to get through alive, get paid, maybe bring some boots back home, but come home safe and sound back to his country that sent him with all the money that they get, and they get paid well.
Hezbollah continues daily rocket and drone attacks ranging across northern and central Israel. How effective has the Israeli air defense system been, and what is the difficulty in tracking and intercepting drones, and what are the possible solutions?
Well, one of the problems with tracking and intercepting drones is that they're much easier. It's more difficult, I should say, for Iron Dome, which is sort of the go-to air defense system that Israel has, to get drones. That's not what they do. They get ballistics and they get rockets, but drones fly under the radar pretty much all the time. So can they be shot down? Of course, and they are. But Iron Dome doesn't have that. Iron Dome's a great system, but it doesn't work well for drones. So when a drone is launched, it's just going to fly around until somebody gets a shot at it. Either a fighter aircraft or some other ground-based system might be able to hit it, but it doesn't. The Iron Dome isn't that system. So what are possible solutions? Well, what the IDF is doing and what the IAF is doing is they're killing drone operators. I think the commander of the drone force for Hezbollah was killed several days ago. That's good. And other low-level commanders are being eliminated all the time. And also drone launch sites are being taken out both by the Air Force and by the IDF. So there's just attriting them and getting rid of them is one technique. The other is there are effective systems, air defense systems, which can get drones. And I know the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Army are developing those. They just haven't been fielded in enough volume to make a significant difference. I have friends, and I'm sure you do too. I have friends who live in northern Israel who get attacked all the time. In fact, there was a barrage just this morning that came up on the Home Front Command warning site. And I don't track every barrage, but I track the homes of my friends in Eshar and Haifa, and both Eshar and Haifa got hit this morning by probably drones, but they could have been rockets too. But they got to solve this problem, and that's another reason why we talked earlier, I think, about is there going to be a ceasefire? Uh, why would there be? I mean, Hezbollah continues to fire at targets, civilian targets in northern Israel, and shows no incentive or any. They seem to have no desire to stop their own firing. They're not asking for a ceasefire. We are the United States. We're trying to get a ceasefire, but until the people who are doing the depredations, who are doing the terrorism, have any inclination to stop it, it's not going to happen. And the Hezbollah has shown no inclination of stopping. They just want to kill Jews, and that's what they're doing it less over time because the Israelis are fighting back well, but they're still doing it. And my thought is, why would I make a ceasefire with somebody who's going to continue to attack? I'm not sure that makes any sense at all. I don't know well, I do know why we're pushing for a ceasefire before the election. I understand that. It's domestic politics. But I think Hezbollah doesn't want it, and Israel is not prone to stopping attacking as long as the attacks themselves are what's going to limit the attacks from Hezbollah.
So I understand why the Biden administration's motivation is there to try and show to strategic electoral groups in the United States, given the national elections on November 5th. But why are IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant pressuring Prime Minister Netanyahu to cut a ceasefire deal?
I don't think they do this without permission of the government. I think what they're trying to play with is the international pressure. And if they say that we would like to have a ceasefire too, then that means that reduces the international pressure a little bit because it sounds like there's some tension going on between the leadership of the military and the leadership of the government. That's one reason. The other reason I think is they're genuinely concerned about the rising number of casualties in the IDF. You mentioned the number earlier. I mean, 770, more than 770 soldiers have been killed.
And 12,000 wounded.
And 12,000 wounded. And let's talk about the wounds for just a second. These wounds don't just resolve themselves. They last, in many cases, for a lifetime. Post-traumatic stress disorder is huge in the IDF. Thousands. They have all kinds of really important programs, just like we do in the United States. They, like us, are interested in reducing the long-term disability of being post-traumatic stress, but also blindness, amputations, cranial injuries, serious, terrible injuries that can last for a lifetime. So we're talking about a pretty large number of some of the best people in Israel who are suffering from this ongoing war. And so the leadership of the military has to look at that as what are we getting here if we continue to fight, specifically in Gaza? I mean, I know some of the leadership, and I would argue rightfully, is saying are we having diminishing returns, just continuing to hit the Hamas personnel right now? Is there something else we're trying to get? I understand that question. It's a good question. And I wouldn't be the one to answer that question. I don't know. But I think that's a legitimate question that the leadership is asking and should ask. In terms of Hezbollah and in terms of the reference to UN Resolution 1701, which means that it's demilitarized south of the Litani River. I don't think there's any sense. The Hezbollah said they're not going to do that. So the Lebanese are saying, yeah, we can probably arrange that. I heard somebody quoted Amos Hochstein, who is our United States special rep to Lebanon, says, oh yeah, they've agreed to that, but I haven't seen that. It wouldn't be the first time a State Department representative has misrepresented the facts on the ground. The State Department wants to have some kind of resolution of this conflict before November 5th. And they might not stop until November 5th itself. in hopes of influencing the votes in Michigan, for example. We'll see.
My problem with Mr. Hochstein, who is, quote, an Israeli American citizen, is the fact that he was the gentleman who negotiated the change in the borderline, giving essentially Hezbollah a piece of the action in the natural gas fields offshore.
Yeah, I don't.
We don't.
I hope that one outcome of our election, I hope, will be the early retirement of Mr. Hochstein and Mr. Blinken. They can go and do something else. Go work for a think tank or something, because they have been nothing but disruptive.
Well, after the successful assassination, killing, whatever you want to call it, by, it turns out, a unit of Haredi troops in Rafah of the late unregarded political leader Yahya Sinwar. What are the IDF objectives and goals in cleaning up the remaining Hamas fighting units?
That's a question I have, and I realize that there's information out there that I may not have seen, but I think that's a good question. I don't know. I can imagine they want to continue to attack Hamas leadership. They want to continue to disrupt their ability to organize, to develop some sort of new resistance. But beyond that, I think the number of tactical goals that they have in Gaza are probably diminishing, and that may be a good explanation for why Halevi and also Gallant are both asking the question, when is this going to stop? Maybe this is time to negotiate a ceasefire. I think it's much more likely to be the case to have a temporary ceasefire in Gaza than it is in Lebanon, but we shall see.
Well, that brings up one of the so-called war goals, which is freeing the remaining 101 hostages, both Israeli and foreign, essentially held in Gaza by gangs of Hamas fighters at this point. And I note that Yuli Edelstein, chairman of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, was quoted recently as saying there will be no Entebbe-type operations. That's a reference to public demands for liberation and retrieval of these Israeli hostages and others. Does Israel really have any leverage diplomatically to achieve this goal?
No, they unfortunately don't, and one of the reasons they don't is because the United States has continued to work with Qatar to use Qatar as a so-called honest broker. Qatar is not an honest broker. To use them as an honest broker is undermining any possibility of a possible some serious negotiation for hostage release. And I would argue that Egypt is not a particularly honest broker either. So the two countries that we're putting our faith in to make some progress on this are actually on the side of Hamas. So how are we going to get an honest result from that? I don't know. I don't know how they would do that. And one could argue that we have not been helpful. We, the United States, have not been helpful. When the real reason why anybody will negotiate is pressure, the only pressure we've been applying is on Israel. We haven't been applying it. We don't have any pressure on Hamas. In fact, we say, yeah, we're gonna tolerate protests against Israel in our own country, and we're gonna criticize Israel. And so when we make a statement about how to get a ceasefire, they don't talk about Hamas. There's a reason this is problem, the reason that the hostages are there in the first place, is Hamas. It's not Israel. So putting pressure on the government of Israel to do a ceasefire and hostage exchange without mentioning Hamas, it strikes me as stupid. But that's exactly what we're doing. So I don't think we played this very well in terms of just how to do a negotiation. I'm not sure what, at this point, we've gone so far down the road of foolishness. I'm not sure how we're going to back out of it without some change in our own administration. I don't know how we can do that. I'm at a loss. I don't know why we've done this in the first place, but to push for it now, what I'm reading is that there's going to be a very limited hostage exchange, 5 hostages. Hopefully, they're all alive, and for a bunch of Hamas prisoners, and then a ceasefire for, I think it's 2 days. Was it 2 or 5 days? Short period of time. Well, I would like, I mean, obviously, we pray for the hostages' lives. We want them to be returned. We would love to see them come home. Everybody that I know, and, surrounded by Jewish brothers and sisters, we all pray for the return of the hostages because we do. But the question is how, and what is the cost of bringing back the hostages? Well, if the cost is undermining our own safety and security in the future, that's something we should take into account. And I think that might be the cost.
Been some interesting day after proposals by Netanyahu government coalition partners about resurrecting something that occurred in 2005 that I wrote about with an interesting title called Balagan. And that was the forcible evacuation of 10,000 Jews from settlements in what was called Gush Katif areas. And how realistic is that prospect given international demands for returning control to the PA, the Palestinian Authority, with backing by multi-Arab occupation forces? And I would say that the multi-Arab forces are the, quote, equivalent of the UNIFIL forces?
Well, I think it's unrealistic in the short term, for sure.
Yep.
I don't think anything's going to happen like that in the next 2 or 3 months. But I think long term, the key to fixing this will be to soften up Egypt. Egypt could have welcomed refugees had they been inclined to do that. They got plenty of space in Sinai, and Sinai happens to border Gaza. And the people in Sinai are at least distantly related to the people in Gaza. And Egypt can be bought. Egypt can be bought because they have a terrible economy. They're tremendously dependent on the United States and on the goodwill of other countries, not on Iran. They have their own problem with Muslim Brotherhood, no question about that. In fact, that's probably what if they're seriously afraid of welcoming Gazans into Egypt, it's probably because of they're afraid this would just be hundreds of thousands of new Muslim Brotherhood converts. They don't want that, but we can make it easier for them if we wanted to. We put 0, as far as I know. Maybe there's efforts going on under the table. I don't know. I hope so, but it doesn't appear to me or to anybody else who spends time observing this and writes about it. Doesn't appear that there's been any pressure on Egypt to reverse its position on, we're not going to let the refugees come into Egypt. We want to keep them in Gaza. Well, money can help with that. So I think long term, let's say between now and 6 months from now, again, depending on the results of the election, I think that might be a worthwhile approach, is to buy the Egyptians, essentially. They're right there. They've got infrastructure in Sinai that they could open up. They got land in Sinai they could open up. They would love to have construction supported U.S. contributions to build places for the Gazans. They would love that. It might even that might even offset their fear of Muslim Brotherhood because it might buy that fear away. We'll see. I think short term, we're not going to see anything like a resettlement of Gaza, but certainly there are parts there. There's a political movement inside Israel to settle there if that becomes an option.
The other front that's opening up is unfortunately Jordan. Jordan has always been within an eye blink of having a Muslim Brotherhood government seize power. And after these recent elections and terror attacks, I might add, perpetrated out of Jordan against Israeli hosts, the IDF has apparently established a new fighting unit to essentially address that threat. I think it's Division 699 that's been recently authorized. That tells me that there is the potential danger of Iran on the opposite side of the Jordanian frontier of working assiduously, essentially to undermine Hashemite control, such as it is at this point in time. Do you think that is a perilous problem for Israel to face?
Yes, it is. One can make the argument, looking at history of the region, that the majority population in Jordan is already Palestinian. It's not Jordanian. Jordan is the name given to the land by Britain, Transjordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Those are specious names for land that is occupied by Palestinians, and always and has been for the last 100 years. So it should be no surprise to anyone that the native population, as it were, of the current country of Jordan is they're related to the population that's on the West Bank in Judea and Samaria, and would love nothing more than to gain larger land space, and is restive by its origins because their families were their history is devoted to relitigating the UN partition of 1947. And they participated both in the Jordanian military, but also in the Arab Liberation Army and the Arab Army of God that both invaded between November 1947 and May 1948 when Israel was declared. So go back in history and look at that population, and then look at what the Jordanian government did to really cut off that significant population with the Black September operation in 1971. So this war has gone on. It's not new. You could trace it back to more than 150 years ago with the various population turmoil there's been. The good news for us as supporters of Israel is that Israel has become a successful democratic state, including in Judea and Samaria. And the state of Israel is not going anywhere. I find that incredibly inspiring, but it's been a hard fought and continues to be a hard fought challenge for Israelis. They know it. That's why they don't want a two-state solution. There's already a two-state solution. It's called Jordan.
Jordan as Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. So let's not kid ourselves. Most Jordanians, to the extent that they think of themselves as a people, they don't say they're Jordanians. They say they're Palestinians, and they are. Okay, that's fine. But I think it's a very, very, very dangerous situation. The good news, I think, if there is good news here, the Hashemite kingdom is resilient, has been resilient for the last since 1950. They have been resilient. The current king doesn't appear to be. He's threatened, of course, but he's also able to stand on his feet. And he has a powerful security apparatus. His mukhabarat, his intelligence service, is powerful, and he's not going to go down easy. But he could, and if he does, that's going to be a real problem for Israel, and a real problem for the rest of the population in Israel who live in Judea and Samaria.
On a final note, it's not lost on either you or I. The Knesset passed two bills outlawing UNRWA, which has been in existence for almost 6 decades.
Yeah, since 1950.
Yeah. Any refugee groups have been resettled in less than a decade around issues where the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is involved. That's not the case with UNRWA. And the UN and its allies across the globe instantly condemned Israel. So what evidence does IDF operations uncovered regarding Hamas terrorist fighters as UNRWA staff and command locations during Operation Iron Swords?
Not only are there UNRWA personnel who also happen to be Hamas personnel, not only does Hamas use UNRWA facilities for its command headquarters and its outposts, not only does UNRWA donate equipment and supplies to Hamas, and we know that from the operations in Gaza, but it also teaches a new generation of Palestinian Gazans to hate Israel and join Hamas and fight against Israel and kill Jews. And this has been going on since the beginning, since 1950. So they've raised an entire generation on generation of radical Islamic jihadists to fight Israel. And they wouldn't stop. So all I can say to the Knesset for destroying the access that UNRWA has to Israel is Mazel Tov. It took a long time to do that. I think there's been a lot of pressure from the international community, including the United States, not to do that. But I think they have done a courageous thing. And I think it will have an effect, positive effect, on trying to fix this generational problem. I mean, it's amazing to me that not only do they provide services for refugees, they provide services for adoptees of refugees, people who don't even have any blood relation to refugees. They have generational ties by just because they're adopted. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the logic of that. But the Israelis, they finally had enough of the international pressure and said, "The hell with this. We're going to just get rid of them." And so they won't help. They won't provide office space. They won't sanction their presence in Israel. They're gonna destroy their operation, and they should have. One could argue they should have done it a long time ago. They just done it. That's good. It's only been a week.
On that note, I would like to confer with you and say, Am Yisrael Chai, for this brilliant discussion about where things are trending, and demonstration of Israel's resilience, not only fighting, but in support of its people. We hope that's the case across all of the Jewish diaspora in terms of support. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a real privilege to speak with you. And I've learned from this conversation, Israel High.